Welcome to Brain Lady Speaks with Julie Anderson. Julie Brain Lady Anderson is considered to be one of the nation's top experts on the brain-personality connection. She has been inspiring her audiences to fire up their brains and ignite positive changes in their relationships. And now she is here to bring that knowledge to you. The information she shares will help those who hear it to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. When you learn to tap into the potential of your natural gifts and the power of the brain-mind connection, there is no limit to what you can accomplish. Today and every Wednesday on Brain Lady Speaks, you'll explore the latest findings to see how they have practical application in your life. And now, get ready to join Julie Anderson on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show. Take it away, Julie.
Welcome to another episode of the Brain Lady Speaks podcast. I am so excited about today's show. I know I say that a lot of times, but I really mean it this time. I have a guest. I was introduced to this guest via another guest on one of my other podcasts, and I was just so jazzed to be able to have another brain enthusiast on the Brain Lady Speaks program. So we are going to have with us today Dr. Sarah Allen. Dr. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we dive in and start geeking out over the brain, let me read our listeners and watchers, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, her professional bio. So Dr. Sarah Allen is a pediatric neuropsychologist. Oh, such a fascinating field. And mom of two with, guess what? She's got two bonus kids. How fun. With humor and good sense, Dr. Sarah will support you in understanding the brain science so moms and teachers learn to look at their kids as little brains. I love it. This results in raising happy, connected, successful humans, building kids' brains without losing your mind. Dr. Sarah has spent over 15 years studying neuroscience and is the author of the bestselling international. I need a brain today.
It was intentional too.
Was intentionally international, best-selling and award-winning book, Raising Brains. Her work has been featured in Forbes, Pop Sugar, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philly.com, Lifehacker, etc. She's been featured on 6 ABC, ABC 15, NBC 10, Good Day Rochester, Good Day Philadelphia, 954 BNFM. Her Story, WHYY, The Pulse, NPR, and more. Dr. Sarah, welcome to the Brain Lady Speaks show.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, I'm so excited to be here. Any show with Brain Lady is a friend of mine, so I'm happy to be here.
I love it. And I think I was reading on your website, what does it say? You're the brain gal, you're the neighborhood brain gal.
America's Brain Lady. So that's really fun.
So we've got America's brain gal talking to the brain lady. This is awesome. Awesome. And I love your platform, building amazing humans, right? By starting and understanding the brains of our children. I think this is so important. When I first started diving into the brain, the biggest benefit was I had little kids. And so now I could look at my little boys and I could think, okay, little boy brain, one was an extrovert, one's an introvert, one's an ambivert. Like I could, in teaching them, because I homeschooled them, right? It was like, it made such a difference in the way I parented them. So you bringing this information to parents is amazing. It's amazing to me. So I applaud you for that. And I can't wait. I'll stop talking so we can hear you more. But tell us, a pediatric neuroscientist or neuropsychologist.
Neuropsychologist, yeah.
What like that is a very, very niche field of neuroscience. Mm-hmm. What interested you to do this in your life?
It's funny because I think some of it was just originally, I think it was following opportunities. And I think some of that's kind of woven into the Raising Brains model in general. But a lot of it was just such an interest in neuroscience in general. But I also have this nagging practicality side to me. I like efficiency and effectiveness, and I want to use things right away. So as I was studying all of this, I really wanted to know, how does that translate to my life?
Mhm.
And then, as I got into brain injury recovery and rehab settings, and then I ended up from adults into peds, and I realized with kids that kids' brains are so moldable.
Mhm.
There was even a time that I was studying this so much that I was scared to have kids because I was worried that I would mess them up.
Yeah.
And then I realized over time that there's certain things that you need to do to make sure that you're raising good kids, but most of it is just loving and trying, and showing them you're trying so that they learn how to do that themselves. And I don't want to, spoiler alert too much here in terms of the Raising Brains model, but I think that that's what really drew me to writing this book, and to becoming a pediatric neuroscientist or neuropsychologist. Now I'm saying in general, because I really wanted to see the function, not just the structure of the brain, and really make things very usable for people. And so that's kind of what drew me. I'm a clinical psychologist with a concentration here in neuropsychology. So really about human behavior in general. And so having that background in neuroscience just can kind of kick up the brain behavior relationship components to what I do.
Yeah, and I love it because it's so practical, with all of the what's coming out of the field of neuroscience gives us the, oh, okay, now we have brain scans that can fully explain what's going on in the brain when certain things are happening. Or for kids, I think this is really important. What's not going on in the brain, because there's just portions of the brain that just isn't there yet. It's
Mhm.
just not fully developed. It's not fully myelinated. It's just not working at its peak. And sometimes we look at our kids and we think, well, they should be thinking like us.
Mhm.
And they don't, because their brains aren't like us, right?
Yeah, and I think that what you just talked about in terms of myelination, just in terms of function and connection there, what is neat about that concept is the fact that we get to help kids' brains mold in the right way. So it's a pro and a con that they're not fully
Right.
developed. If they were fully developed, we wouldn't really have a job, but we do have a job as parents and with teachers and even coaches and dance instructors and anyone who comes into contact with kids, in that we get to shape the way those neurons connect, those cells in the brain connect. We get to help kids learn and grow. And if we can really grasp the idea that our kids are little brains and that we're trying to break down skills and build them up. So just in the way we would teach math, we're teaching social skills, emotional skills, coping skills, communication skills. It becomes much more of a job of teaching and a job of helping your kids grow versus a job of keeping kids obedient and well behaved.
Mm.
It doesn't result actually in successful and connected adults.
Boy, that is a really good point. I think huge point, because we all want our kids to be good. We want them to be obedient. And if we focus too much on that, we're not teaching them the skills to develop and grow, and that would make them want to be good individuals.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want obedient people, right? You don't want people to listen to authority just for the sake of listening to authority. I think as adults, we really value the idea that we can think abstractly, that we can question, or even our whole governmental system is based on checks and balances. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to think clearly and abstractly and in a way that doesn't necessarily question authority to the point where you're going to get yourself into trouble, but to question ideas and to think about them and to learn how to think about them. And so when we just ask kids to behave and just listen to us because I said so, because this is the way, because I'm your mom or because I am the teacher, that doesn't help their brains to grow and to learn how to understand and absorb material. That's going to smush and really hold kids back. And then what we get is people who blindly follow authority as adults, and who don't have the skills for adapting and coping and thinking for themselves. I think we saw a lot of this over the pandemic when the world shut down and our kids were home. And now all of a sudden, you may have had this experience because you homeschooled, but for most of us who didn't homeschool, who relied a lot on the school systems, I don't think we realized how much teaching actually happens during a school day that has nothing to do with academic learning. It
Right.
has to do with social engagement, emotional engagement, communication, how to go about planning things out. What do you do when you don't know what to do? How do you problem solve?
Mhm.
All of those things that our teachers naturally know to teach kids, parents, I don't think recognized. And that's why the juggle was so hard, trying to work and trying to do school. It's not just because kids couldn't sit in front of the computers, although that was a component of it. It's also because we needed to do all this other stuff, to teach them all these other things.
Yeah.
And that became too much of a full-time job for most people. But there are some ways that you can really focus on the growth if you know how. Teachers were taught how to teach, but parents often are just sent home with their kids. You don't even need to take a test. I often say you need a drive test to take a driver's license, but here's a kid. Go ahead.
Right. There's no manual that comes when you leave the hospital with your new baby.
Right. Exactly. And that is really difficult. And it's, I think it's unreasonable to expect parents just to know what to do. And so people listening to this podcast, for example, they're already a step ahead of the game because they're trying to figure it out. And I think that that's half the battle, is just trying to do the best thing that you can to figure out how to grow, what I would say, grow your little brains.
Yeah. I think that's why our firstborns, one of the things I talk about when I teach the brain personality connection is the birth order, different things that come out personality wise in the birth order. And our firstborns, they're kind of an experiment most of the time. Right? Yeah. For us as parents, we learn a lot of what we should and shouldn't do on our firstborns. Not that we can't correct that and learn from it and grow, and we learn together.
And then for most of us, the nice evil trick of the world is to give us a second one that's nothing like the first one too. So learn all the skills and relearn them.
Exactly. And then you have a third. I tell everybody, you have a third. It's like, how can you have complete opposites that are three complete opposites, right? Yeah. It's like, wait a minute, how does that work? But it's like each individual child is so unique, and different things that work with one child, it doesn't work with the next one, and you have to figure out what works best for their brain.
I think that's really, really important. And I think that's the number one mistake parents make, is thinking that there's one way of doing something, that this one thing will work. And we see a lot of this in the media, and we see a lot of this in the programs that come out, these kinds of extreme programs that it has to be all one way or the other. You have to consciously parent all the way to the point of no punishment, of none of these other pieces, or, or you never can raise your voice, right? Or if you punish once, that all of a sudden you're a bad parent, or that you always have to listen to everything the kids are saying and talk them through anything that with an always or a never in it. Even from the brain perspective, we know the brain loves everything in moderation. I have these things in my book called Brain Rule, Life Rule. Everything in moderation is key, right? Yeah. Too much alcohol is going to throw you overboard. Just a little bit is probably not too bad of a thing for your brain, right? And too much of the bad foods are terrible. A little bit your brain can handle. So it's always something moderate. And I think that's the idea, is when I say to help to raise your kids without losing your mind, these are strategies that go into the way you naturally parent. You don't need to change your personality completely as a teacher or a parent. There are just some things that you can do. Like, for example, start looking at your kids like little brains. Start asking, what does this little brain need to learn? What can I teach this little brain? I call them my 2 magic questions. Because when you're having a behavior in a kid, what's really happening is they're trying to communicate, right? Behaviors are not about you. It's not to take it personally. That's usually kids' ways of communicating. Something's going on with me. I don't like something. I don't know how to communicate this in the correct way, whatever it is. But there's usually a skill that our kids need to learn. So if you watch them when they're doing this and you think, what does this little brain need to learn? What can I teach this little brain? It not only reduces your emotional response, you become this brain detective, but it also allows you to help to get in there and figure out, how do you build your child's skills, and what does this one individual kid need? Because otherwise, if we're always saying anytime a kid, yells and screams at you, you send them to their room, then we're missing some emotional components that this one kid might have. And then if we have another kid who is particularly oppositional and needs to know that boundary of what can and cannot do, and we sit and talk to them, now we're giving more attention to a behavior that we really don't want to see. So the first key is always to just figure out, what does that little brain need to learn? What can I teach that little brain? And that's how we learn how to respond. That's because it's not an extreme system. It's really getting to know that brain and what that brain needs, and the pattern of thinking that you can then learn how to respond to your kids in ways that, again, reduce your own emotional reaction and allow you to react with what I call the frontal lobe of the brain, or Franny. Right. I like to call it Franny, because she's just like, she's got her hand in everything. I picture her like this octopus, lots of things going on, and she's responsible for everything. Right. And so we need to be able to think with her and not have her working on managing the emotional part of our brain, which is the amygdala. I call her Amy G because she's so emotional. And I picture her like this teenage puffer fish, right? And if you have a preteen or a teenager, you know what I mean? It's like walking on eggshells around Amy G, right? And anytime your kid's yelling and screaming at you, your Amy G is going to go puff, right? Puff, get spikes everywhere. And now we're in trouble because not only is your Amy G going, but I guarantee you your kid's Amy G is going. And poor Franny here is trying to figure out how to calm Amy G. And when she's doing that, she can also be logical and reasonable and kind and walk us step by step through things. So we really have to work on first the emotional components and having a process for raising your brain, like thinking about what your little brain needs to learn, what can you teach your little brain, just starting there has been so effective for parents and teachers.
Yeah, that's a great, I love your little characters, because I talk about the amygdala overreacting and hijacking the frontal cortex, and and you put it down into something that's very visual and very understandable. And when you understand that, or when parents, I should say, really get the picture that the prefrontal cortex is the last thing that develops in a child. So you have to play the prefrontal cortex for both you and your children in order to walk through things. So if you respond emotionally, exactly what you just described happened. So is this kind of what you talk about when you explain the difference between building skills in your children versus managing behavior?
Definitely. And one of the things I wanted to comment on that you just said is important, that we have to be the prefrontal lobe or the frontal lobe for both us and our kids. It's true and it's not true at the same time, because what we're doing is modeling the emotional control system, right? So we're modeling Franny. So if we lose it and we yell, that isn't a failure. That might be us losing, our Franny is overworked and Amy G won at that point in time. But it's what we do about it after that. It's the way that we help our kids see, hey, Amy G is winning here and my Franny went off. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to yell at you. Here's what I did when that happens. That's why I walked away for a minute, because I needed to really calm down. And that's what I wanted to do. So we're not just becoming our kids' frontal lobes. We're teaching their frontal lobe how to develop. Some of that is modeling, and some of that is actually saying to them, your Amy G is going. Here are some of the skills you can use with, to gain back that Franny control. And there's methods for that. So it really isn't just about controlling yourself because your kids don't have those parts of the brain. It's additionally controlling yourself so your kids can see how to do it, so that you can teach their brains how to react. And that's what, it has to do with when we talk about building skills, not just managing behavior. It's not that we just don't want them to chuck something at our head. It's that we want them to have the skill to say, I'm angry and upset. Something happened at school today, and when you asked me to do something the second I walked in, it just completely overwhelmed my system. We want you to say that instead of throwing something at me, instead of stomping up the stairs with I hate you, those kinds of things. Yeah. And so, yes, we want to be a prefrontal lobe. We don't want to respond emotionally all the time, but we also want to act as a model and build the skill in our kids. And that's what I mean about building skills, not just managing behavior. That when we talk about behavior, listen to the message, not the delivery of that behavior, because the delivery is if it was perfect, they wouldn't need parents. They wouldn't need teachers. And the way that Franny develops, yes, it's age, it's time. We know it's probably in the 20s somewhere that your Franny fully develops. By the way, then after that, it's kind of all downhill. It goes down after that. We have this small window here.
You have this little window of opportunity.
It's like little kids, and then you have this little window, and then as you become, older, you kind of start to mimic the little kids again, and we end up taking care of our parents who are at the point. So it's just a whole wonderful life cycle. But if we're constantly focusing on, again, building skills, not just managing behavior, we're not seeing behavior as a slight to us. Can't you listen to authority? Why don't you understand this? I told you to because I'm your mom and I said so. If you're finding yourself say those things, then you're really managing behavior. If instead you're finding yourself thinking, okay, so what is happening with this kiddo right now? What are they trying to do? Do they need to use better words to describe how they're feeling? Do they even know how they're feeling? I often talk about innie and outie brains because there's two pretty distinct ways I see kids that tend to respond to emotion. You know, your outie brains are the ones that I was just talking about, the ones that are throwing stuff at your head and screaming and stomping up the stairs. You know how they're feeling because they're throwing it at you verbally.
It's in your face.
Right in your face, right? I actually find those kids a lot easier to handle, and actually adults too. Now that I think about it, because I understand, like I hear you. I'm right there with you. It's all out, right? Then you have your innie brains, and those are the ones that actually kind of withdraw more, and they pull back a bit when they're not feeling well. And they might be a little cranky at you, or they might just kind of not want to do things, but they kind of keep it inside. They don't even know how they're feeling. Something happens and automatically, you know, they act, what's the clinical term? Like bitchy, I think is what the one I use for my daughter. And she gets all like that. And she does that because she didn't even know how she was feeling. She's an innie brain. And so the interventions and the support that we can give those two different types of brains are completely the opposite. And I'll give you one example. If we just talk about breathing strategies, like, because that's a pretty common one these days, right? So we give you something like, I talk about taco breaths in the book because my family's big taco fans. So smell the tacos, blow out the candles, right? So we get tacos and birthday cake. How could it go wrong, right? So smell the tacos, blow out the candles. And when you have that, you're helping the brain, the physiological response kind of calm down. So brain and body calm down. Now, you have an outie brain and they're screaming at you and you tell them to breathe. You know, we often try to implement those strategies down because it looks like they need to calm down, but really they need a different communication strategy for getting it out. Once they're up that high, you tell them to breathe and you're going to get 20 more things thrown at your head.
Right.
That's not going to work at all. So the only way to use a breathing strategy with an outie brain is to get it before it goes up too high. Get them to calm down so that they're able to communicate these thoughts to you. With an innie brain, when they get up that high, they have no idea what's going on. Everything's a mess and it's all chaotic in their brain. So by telling them to breathe when they get that upset, that is going to be helpful because that's going to calm their brain down and give them the ability to start to be a little bit more reasonable. They need the elevation to come down, and you're going to be able to support them that way. So two completely different same strategy, but used in two different ways for different brains. And that's why understanding the neuroscience of the brain is so important when you're raising kids, because you start to become that brain detective. When I say, what does this little brain need to learn? What can I teach this little brain? You get all these ideas of what they need because you understand the dynamics of that brain. And that's what I love. I'm sorry, I'm geeking out over, but that's exactly what I love.
I love it. I love it. My brain's going a million miles a minute too, because, you know, there's so many applications to this. This is why you can't use one parenting style with each child, because each child is its own individual brain, right? So as you said, you have to look at what does their brain need to work through this moment, or to even build their self-esteem or build their value of themselves. You know, it's going to be a little bit different with different kids depending on whether they're an innie brain or an outie brain or a quiet brain or a loud brain. It just really depends. And even the male female brain. Now you have one, or I think your kids, you have one son and one daughter, and then you have two.
Yep. And they're one, two. We have 2 girls, 2 boys. Yep.
So I tell people all the time, there's a difference, that if that Y chromosome is present, the brain gets a chemical bath that changes literally the wiring of that brain. Now, in the average, you can have a very feminine male brain or a very masculine feminine brain. But what's been your experience when you work with the two?
Well, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that it's all chemically driven in the brain, right? So we're talking about testosterone and estrogen, which is going to shape the development of the brain differently. And, you know, just as a little bit of a side, we're talking gender right now, male, female, but that testosterone, estrogen can change during development. And that's, I think, where we're getting these different gender identities. But in any case, I think they do respond very differently. They do think very differently. Kind of generally, I'll talk testosterone versus estrogen brain, you know, estrogen brain, especially with so many hormones going on. Your preteen years are so different in a girl than they are in a boy. And then working your way through that, helping your kids work through that can be really, really difficult. And they have different skills they need to learn. And they present very, very differently. And boys, you know, a lot of times it's more of a physical outlet that they can use. And, sometimes it can even be a little more concrete, a little less kind of interwoven. If you watch girls and boys play when they're really young, girls are a lot more verbal. The verbal areas actually develop very differently in girls than in boys. So you'll see them verbal sooner. You'll also see their play be very verbal. As a matter of fact, a lot of the kids I see with language disabilities, females that I see with language disabilities, it's really difficult sometimes for them because language in girls is so verbal that often I'll tell them to go get a group of guy friends, because a lot of the play is much more physical. It's a lot more of a rough and tumble. There's not a lot of language that's actually used early on. You see girls with playing make-believe, either in person or with dolls or something like that, and they're having these whole conversations. Actually, I talk about this in the book, but I haven't talked about it in a while. I remember when I walked in on my daughter when she was a toddler playing by herself. She was, I guess she was only a child at the time, so she was pretty young. And all she was doing is saying, she was talking about a teacher. She had I just hired you, and I don't expect that kind of behavior. And I'm sorry, but you're fired, and and we can't come back, and I can't. Okay. And she's having clearly this conversation in her head. I understand what you're saying. I see where you're coming from. Well, we'll try one more time, but then if that doesn't work, you're fired.
I love it.
Something's wrong with her. What's happening? She's hearing voices, which I often get parents ask me, well, no, what it is this internal speech that we actually all have. If you pay attention to your own, kind of like right when you're waking up, or maybe when you're daydreaming off a little bit, you have these little conversations in your head, or you might kind of think of something you think would happen, or you find yourself smirking at some situation that's going on in your head. It's internal speech. But her Franny is still developing. She barely has any at this point. And so it's just all coming out.
Yep.
And again, understanding the brain, what we see this in our kids with ADHD. Oftentimes our kids with ADHD might say things like, I want to kill you, or, I want to. Right. And it's not that they actually want to kill you. It's that if somebody were to cut you off in traffic, you would probably say, I'm going to kill you. But if somebody was in the car, you might keep it in your head. They don't have that Franny to do that for them. And so again, this understanding of the brain, and we just talked like very briefly on the surface, but there is, a way to understand the brain in a very practical, effective way that gives you a different perspective on behaviors that you see and raising your kids. And that's been my goal, really, especially at the pandemic. I lost 3 kids before I had my kids. My sister died at 29 of breast cancer. I got divorced, I moved to a new town, the whole world shut down, right? And so now I'm left with doing mostly schoolwork as schools shut down. So not a lot of work, but a lot of time to think. And I kind of processed a lot of what had happened in my life and what we'd gone through with my kids. And I realized that, and it was my mom who kind of said, people don't think like this, Sarah, you need to write this down.
Yeah.
And that's how this book was born, because I realized that my kids had been through a lot in their life. They lost their Aunt Nana. They, a lot of what I do is building independence in my kids. So they've had to do a lot on their own. So when this happened, they had some skills in terms of, okay, something bad happened. What do we do about it? And how do we make this better? And how do we deal with these feelings? But a lot of the kids I worked with and a lot of schools I worked with, we weren't seeing that same characteristic in a lot of these kids. And now that we're back, mostly, for the most part anyway, we're seeing a big lag in the social development of our kids because they've been isolated, because they either haven't learned any of those those frontal Franny skills, like planning, organizing, problem solving, or they just haven't had the exposure to other kids to be able to social problem solve. So we have this big gap no matter what age, really. We're seeing a lot of kids who are developmentally more mature, but emotionally not. So there's this lag. It's like the brain development kind of got started without the environmental support. So it's really more important than ever for us to use an approach like Raising Brains and really help fill in these gaps in our kids. And I hope my big goal would be to start people really young. I have a lot of grandparents saying, how do I help my daughter's having a baby or my son's having a baby? How do I start them really young in this model? And I think that's where I see the biggest benefit, is to start this young. Nobody talks about that, right? They say diapers, feeding, sleeping.
Formula. Yeah.
And you're talking, what do I do?
Yeah. I love it. I think that's amazing. This type of a book should go should be, you know, that little care package you get when you leave the doctor's office when you first find out you're pregnant, you know, all
Mhm,
of that. Like this book, you have a book on it, Raising Brains, right? That should be
mhm.
like in all of those packets, right?
Well,
Because
and I kind
it's
of created it's funny because I had people asking a lot. So we actually did one better. We have the book, but we also have a little course. So it has this little sequence in it that's about it's actually for moms who really wanted to raise little brains like this. So we have a new brain box that we've been developing to help these moms because listen, this is what I wanted. I wanted someone to tell me, okay, wait a minute, how do I raise a brain? You know, what are
right.
parenting styles and how did that affect me? You know, and then some stuff about mom guilt, to be very honest, because it all gets wound together, especially when you're trying to raise these little brains.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a new brain box for people like that too, along with the book, because like you said, it's just so hard to figure out how to do that, you know?
Yeah, I love it. It's brilliant. It's just mind blowing. It's brilliant. And I think when we're able to utilize this information, I we're running at 30 minutes here, and I know we could
I
just keep going
know.
and going. But I do want to finish up with giving a piece of it because when we're filming this, we're in the middle of August.
Uh-huh.
So for a lot of people, and I love what you hit on, how much more you think the 2 years of COVID were had an impact on your brain. Think
Hmm.
about it. If I'm 57, right? So 2 years out of a 57-year-old life, it's not that huge of a chunk of time. But when you're
Hmm.
talking about 2 years for a 10-year-old, right? That's 20% of their life.
Yep.
So 20% of that building block in that such a crucial time, it's huge. So with there's going to be a lot of emotional, what's the word, fallout, if you will, that's
Hmm.
going to come from all the schools being back to almost what you would call normal, right? What's
Yeah.
the biggest piece of advice that you would like to, obviously everybody go visit brainbehaviourbridge.com and get her book, but what's the biggest piece of advice that you would give parents watching this now that can help them in this next couple of months to help their children and their children's brains make a healthy adjustment and get comfortable back in that position again?
This is I love this question, such a great question. You know, I think the first thing is to remember that when you're seeing behaviors in your kids, they're likely from lack of skill. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
they lost about 2 years of this. So it's usually a social skill, an emotional skill, or a communication skill that we're really going to end up trying to target. And it's funny because when you find that skill, you'll realize there's a lot of different components to that you might need to break down and start small. Like I talked about any brains. So you might just need to help them figure out what emotion they're feeling. Using just emotion words might be the place to start. And then you might move into expression of that. So they might do that by screaming, yelling, or something. That would actually be better. That would be good because they're starting it to come out. And then you want to shape that into it. So that's just like a little example of how many steps go into emotional expression and communication of a kid's needs. So remember, kids speak with their behavior. So you want to listen to that message, not the delivery, as I said earlier, and find that skill because remember, they've lost a lot of social emotional skills. They don't have the same experiences. So if you have older kids and you're watching your younger kids go through middle school or even elementary school, the reason that things are different is because they've lost a couple years of experience by just that isolation and having to figure out different ways. Now, there's been some benefit. We have a virtual world and a lot of those things. And so they may do it differently. You might need to give a little more access to video game time. I know I just said that, but it's true because that is a lot of communication. You just might have to help kids learn how to communicate that way. But there's
Yeah.
so much that's now done playing these kind of virtual games. So we want to kind of watch the skill and help that. So if the number one tip I would give for parents going back to school now is to remember that if you're seeing behaviors, it's likely due to a lack of skill. And our job is to be that brain detective and think, what does this little brain need to learn? What can I teach this little brain? And help them develop that.
I love it. I love it. This is so amazing. Well, Dr. Sarah, thank you so much for taking time today to be on the Brain Lady Speak show. And like I said, if you're open to it, I would love to have you back again and there's just so much that we can unwrap. There's so much information here, and I'm sure much of this is covered in the book. And I strongly encourage parents. I am going to just promote this this episode out, because I just really I believe in what you're doing, and I value you in the space, because I think it's a great thing, and I think it's something that a lot of parents need, especially new parents. Just really take a breath as a parent and realize you're not perfect.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Actually, perfection is great. Yeah. And listen, I have some free resources too. You can join my email list. We actually just sent an email about this topic right now that we're just talking about. So you can do that. And then we also have a podcast too called What's Happening Here. My partner, Kevin, and I started that podcast because we really needed a way to help figure out how do we translate this neuroscience into our lives, our blended family, where there isn't one research study or one book for. So feel free to grab those free resources too.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. Sarah, thank you again so very much. We will be having you back again if you're open to that. And I've been blessed to have you on the show today. So thank you for taking the time to be with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, in case you didn't get the message, go connect with her. You want to connect. And share this. Any of your parenting circles, any of your social media groups that you're with, this was valuable information. And it's just little tweaks, right? These understanding neuroscience in real life application. It's just the little tweaks that can make a huge difference in your communication and in your health and happiness. So I encourage you to do that. So please give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a share. Follow. You can connect with me, Brain Lady Julie, at on LinkedIn and Instagram, all those different places. I am Brain Lady Julie. You can also follow the Twitter. I think I'm Brain Lady. So you can follow that. We're building the YouTube channel, a lot of different things. So stay connected with us. We love talking all things brain, all right, and practical application of the brain. So as I like to close every show, I want everyone to just take a nice deep breath, roll your shoulders back, relax for a minute, and simply enjoy every moment.